Every so often, a movie lands on your desk that you go, oh, yeah, this is like a cult classic or one of those like great moments in cinema. And you go, oh, okay, great. And then you go, hey, do you remember Exorcist II, The Heretic? And someone rolls their eyes and says, yeah. I said, did you know the guy who directed that made a sci-fi movie with Sean Connery? And everyone goes, what? And that's the correct answer. It is one of the most baffling fucking films I've ever seen in my entire life. And I want you to see it, but know that this nascent musical podcast friendship we have ends at that point, and you have every reason to hate me afterwards.
It's okay. You'd have to look. I put up with my brother for 10 plus years now on the podcast. You got to do a hell of a lot more than that to piss me off.
Well, see, I thought you were going to say, yeah, but I put up with my brother for 49 years at this point.
Well, that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
There is no love like sibling hate.
Yeah. The problem is I've got one of those like monitor lights that clips over the top. And then I've got a webcam that does the same thing. And you can't perch one thing on another without it being very precarious. So shit was falling. Anyway, we're good now. And I got stuck trying to turn into my own driveway.
What?
Were you leaving or coming home? That's the real question.
I was coming home and the driveway is clear, but we have, like mountains right outside the driveway itself. Well, the problem is, when you're turning, you need more than just the width of your car available. You're a hypotenuse at that point. So I have to, take the turn and then go wide. And then I got stuck on the snow mound that was on the far side of the driveway.
I was just about to wait until
traffic.
I was about to give you double points for using the word hypotenuse correctly in a sentence. That's amazing. That is a real $2 word, my man. Well done.
It's like frozen hot chocolate. You're like, wait a minute.
There is actually a recipe for that I saw somewhere. And part of me wants to try it, but I feel like if I ate a mouthful of cold hot chocolate, my brain would just start falling out of my ears. It would just be, okay, we've gone too far officially.
Right. It's like if you had cold hot chocolate, isn't that just chocolate milk?
Apparently the recipe tastes like you're drinking hot chocolate, except that it's cold.
So wait a second.
It seems unnecessary.
Chocolate milk is I added sugary chocolate syrup to milk.
Right.
And hot chocolate is I added cocoa powder, shaved and or crushed chocolate, and usually, I don't put marshmallows in my hot chocolate. Am I the weird one?
I know you hate our freedoms. Joe, if you don't like marshmallows in the hot chocolate, the terrorists win.
Yeah.
I have Emo's Pizza. Oh, it's Leave the Earth song, baby. Oh, man, I'm getting hyped. This episode of Discography Discussion was recorded on January 31st, 2026. Mammoth, with Adam Drake of the Nerfherder Council. And if you're to blame for something new and fucking amazing, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Lucas. Adam Drake is here. AJ from the Nerfherder Council. You decided to jump in. You didn't want to let John have all the fun. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Oh, man, I'll tell you what. I got so much to say that I had to kick JT off the show just so we could get a word in edgewise and talk about this band. So I'm pumped to talk about some Mammoth/WVH. Are we calling it Mammoth? Or are we calling it Mammoth WVH? Which way are we going with this?
He wants us to call it Mammoth now, so I feel like we need to respect Wolfie's decision, Wolfgang Van Halen. But in my heart of hearts, it is still Mammoth WVH. I'm going to fuck that up tonight. If anybody has a problem with it, get out of my house.
There was a band in the late 90s, early 2000s called Drain STH. And whenever you say Mammoth WVH, my brain immediately starts overwriting it like bad autocorrect. So I almost prefer just calling it Mammoth so that I don't have a fucking aneurysm at some point in this episode.
My biggest issue with the whole dropping of the WVH part is that there was a band called Mammoth that they had to buy the rights from. So now when you just search for Mammoth on most music services, you get 2 bands worth of albums.
Yeah, I had the exact same problem. I had to go on Wikipedia and look up which is which, actually.
Yeah.
Years gone by, that was actually the question, was do we talk about Mammoth or do we wait for Mammoth WVH to release 3 records so we can talk about them on the show? Because I really wanted to talk about Wolfie for like the past 5 years, and I'm glad it's finally time.
You have the weirdest parasocial relationship with this man.
It's JT's fault. He doesn't say Wolfgang Van Halen. He says Wolfie. Because you spend a lot of time watching Van Halen home movies and listening to Eddie Van Halen talk about his son and how much he loves him and how much, how great it was being in a band with his own son. You refer to him by the name that you've heard him referred to by for the longest time. It would be very difficult for me to meet this man in person and say, Wolfgang Van Halen, Discuss Metal Joe. Like, I love everything that you do. I would fuck it up immediately.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I was there at the Balance tour in '96, and here's little toddler Wolfie coming out on the stage, and then now he's like one of my favorite musicians, and he's all grown up. It's weird. It's like watching Dominic Mysterio in WWE. Like, we remember when he was being fought over between Eddie and Ray back in like 2005 in the PG era or whatever it was called.
Have we deciphered yet if he is indeed Eddie's son, or is that just for the lulls in the storytelling?
It's just for the lulls in the storytelling.
Okay. I've had my questions for a long time. Like, yeah, I don't think so, but maybe.
But it's undisputed, obviously, that Wolfie is Eddie's kid. I like to trigger JT with this statement, and maybe this is something better left for the end of the show, but I think overall there's a case to be made that Wolfgang might be the more talented of the two.
Oh, no.
He can write and he can perform all the parts himself, whereas we heard Van Halen 3. We know what happens when Eddie is left to his own devices.
That's very true.
There was so much booze, though, right?
Does that explain the vocals? I'm not talking Gary Sharon's vocals. I'm talking about the last track.
Oh, no.
How many say I?
We're not bringing that up again. I've already talked about that record with your brother on episode 284, and yeah, I'm going to live in my world where 1984 is the only record that matters.
Joe has nearly thrown me out of his house for invoking the name Gary Sharon.
Okay, just
That's
this one time.
Extreme, don't you think?
It's not extreme.
No, that's a totally different band. I'll be here all night,
There
folks.
we go.
I'll be here all night. Be sure to tip your waitress.
At least Lucas picked up on it.
Well, before Lucas and AJ get us off track, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on all of the podcast platforms you listen to, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or one of the many platforms that consume those platforms. We thank you for listening. We thank you for subscribing. And as always, you can find everything Discography discussion at discussmetal.com. Lucas, will you tell everybody about what's going on with the Fright Lab?
Ah, yes, the Fright Lab. I would like to think that the Fright Lab is the preeminent horror podcast. It's probably not, but still, I'd like to think that. That said, the Fright Lab is a podcast where I discuss horror media and how it connects to the real world, interpreting horror through the realms of literary theory, psychology, history, or whatever else I'm on about that day. And rather like Discography discussion, you can pick up the Fright Lab on all major podcast platforms as well as on our website, thefrightlab.com. Just look for us.
You know who else has a podcast?
Who's that?
That talks about really nerdy topics and a shit ton of Star Wars? AJ. AJ, tell everybody what's going on with the Nerfherder Council.
The Nerfherder Council, a bi-weekly diversion into things that are mostly Star Wars, but can also encompass other franchises as well. Our most recent show was actually about the passing of the torch from Kathleen Kennedy over to Dave Filoni. We have covered other great subjects, such as can AI write a better Star War, which we ended up with Han Solo punching Purgles out of existence through hyperspace lanes. So very, very serious podcast about Star Wars and the larger sci-fi world. That is available at thenerfherdercouncil.com, or just search for Nerfherder Council on all your favorite podcast platforms. You can find us there. No problem whatsoever. You can also, if you don't feel like typing that much, just go to nhcpodcast.com and you can get all of our stuff there as well.
I feel like this is the third time we've talked about this, but Kathleen Kennedy, we give her the thumbs up, right? Thanks for all you did. You did some stuff we didn't like, but you did a lot of stuff we did like.
Exactly. Yes. The short, sweet version is that she came in with, frankly, probably an impossible job to do and still did a hell of a decent job at it. Like you said, some big swings, which means you're going to hit some and you're going to whiff some. And that's all you can hope for. That's the true rebel entrepreneurial spirit that George Lucas had for the franchise from the start. So, yeah, they're not all winners, but they're not all supposed to be either. That means that you're trying stuff.
You are excited for Mandalorian and Grogu, right, Lucas?
I'm sorry, what? I'm in the very weird position. Let me try to take that again. My voice is a little funny.
I think he just spoke for most of Star Wars fandom.
Yeah, I'm in the very weird position of being, I don't want to say I'm meh about Star Wars, right? Because I grew up with Star Wars like most people of a particular age group. And there are definitely Star Wars properties that I like. but most long-form TV goes right over my head. If it's longer than like 5 or 10 episodes, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to check out. My girlfriend and I have been in a long-form rewatch of Twin Peaks, and I'm not going to lie. We had to take a break kind of at the end of the winter just because, holidays and things like that.
Also, Twin Peaks.
I'm
Good
sorry.
God, man.
Well, the problem with it is we always forget about Twin Peaks. The last half of season 2 before the last 2 episodes are virtually unwatchable. They are absolute nonsense. And I say that as a fan of David Lynch. I have a limited diet for that level of absolute nonsense. So I struggle with it. Like, I know I'd probably like Andor. There's a very good chance I would really appreciate the story it's telling, the message it's getting at. I have so many goddamn movies I have to watch alongside multiple hobbies, 2 podcasts, and maybe being a person once in a while. So, how do you devote your time to
Touching
media?
grass? Yeah.
Right. I keep hearing that air is really cool, but,
Is that thing that we need to breathe in order to remain conscious?
allegedly.
What about water? We're supposed to drink that, right?
I mean, I personally don't trust
Unconfirmed.
it. I find water is best filtered through a particular variety of South American beans. So, make of that what you will.
I prefer mine with corn, preferably fermented.
That's fair. That's fair.
How many weeks?
I mean, first of all, how do you
Couple
get
years?
Jonathan Davis
Like
in a
4
vat
years
for that
minimum?
long? The joke was right there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Maybe that's why he can't stand up anymore. I don't know.
Nah, that might have something to do with it.
So, Lucas,
Yes, sir.
would you kindly tell me about Mammoth WVH?
Well, I don't know about Mammoth WVH, but I do know about the band Mammoth. Mammoth is I guess, solo project, you could call it, by Wolfgang Van Halen. And if the name Van Halen is tickling the back of your cerebral cortex, there's probably very good reason for it. See, there was this little band, maybe you've heard of them, called Van Halen, only one of the most influential bands in rock and roll. I mean, arguably like top tier, best known, could play at anywhere that could, electricity wise, power their instruments. Well, Wolfgang Van Halen is, I don't use this word lightly, a musical prodigy. I mean, the guy plays literally every instrument on every recording and only has a band around him because he needs to play it live. And, we haven't invented cloning yet, thank God. Well, not human cloning anyway. So yeah, Mammoth. Mammoth is the one-man vision rock and roll project that I've got to level with you. When I first heard, okay, this is the next band, I kind of went, fuck, here we go. And I've got to say, I was pleasantly very surprised by Mammoth because normally I don't want to say, this is going to sound insulting, and I don't mean it to be, middle of the road rock and roll, kind of dead center, this is everything archetypical about rock and roll, is very boring to me most of the time. But I've got to say, shockingly good and shockingly approachable. So yeah, that is Mammoth in a nutshell.
Yeah, I've heard the terms dad rock and butt rock tossed around for the genre. Like the fear was, is this basically a younger version of Nickelback?
No.
Where it kind of
no, it is not.
slaps on the riffs, but no one wants to admit to enjoying it. And that is not this at all. I was suspicious at first as well. I was thinking that this was going to be one of those nepotism projects.
Yes.
Oh, well, I'll watch something with Kelly Osbourne in it because she's Ozzy Osbourne's daughter. No, that is not what this is. And I like that while everybody expected him to come out and just write more Van Halen, it's got its own sound. And he's really done a good job of incorporating enough where he says, yeah, I played my dad's guitar on this track, for example, whatever. But he's not just trying to be Eddie 2.0.
Yeah, it's not aping a sound. It's not chasing after the tone that his father created, which, I mean, to be fair, I think listening to some songs on these 3 albums, you can hear some Van Halen in it. And I would be deeply surprised if you didn't hear some Van Halen in it, right? So he does a good job of kind of cutting his own path into the well-trodden ground that is rock and roll, hard rock, whatever you want to call it. But it is distinctly its own thing. And I've got to say, I was worried also that this would either be that dead center kind of radio rock and roll, or that it would be just pointless technical noodling. Hearing that he had this reputation for being a really incredibly talented technical musician. I was expecting, 45-minute long guitar solos, and I have very limited patience for that kind of rock and roll. So hearing that this guy can write a punchy rock and roll hit, that he can write a good hook, that he can write a good melody, sometimes that's all you need, man.
That is the most important part of songwriting is, do you have a melody? Do you have a hook? Does it sound interesting? But that's songwriting. We're not talking about the most technically sound, I really want to be Meshuggah like Igor. We're talking about, no, is it a good song? And I know Eddie started talking about what would become Mammoth WVH as recently as 2015. He mentioned that Wolfie was working on a solo album. So if we're using that as the starting point, and even further back, you've heard Dan say it 1,000 times, you've had your whole life to write your first album and 2 years to come up with the second one. So how long have some of these musical ideas been in Wolfgang Van Halen's head? As long as they can be there, because he has been surrounded by music. Again, quoting words from Eddie in many interviews. So there's always the concern of nepotism, right? But it was never presented to me like Eddie Van Halen walking out going, and also listen to Wolfie. That never happened. When Eddie was in Van Halen mode, it was Van Halen. It took a lot of time for Wolfgang Van Halen to start mentioning it on his own, which there's a lot of timing and a lot of deaths in the timeline of Mammoth and formerly Mammoth WVH that we're going to get into as the evening goes on.
Yeah, it's I was actually surprised when I started digging into the history of the band and realizing that this was going on so long. One, I didn't realize that he was of the age to begin writing his own music. That alone is just the benefit of, or the curse of being older, is you don't realize exactly how much time is passing as it goes. But yeah, I didn't realize that he started writing this like pretty much right after the Different Kind of Truth tour. So he was writing from like 2013 on, and this thing was in the can by 2018. So like you said, he had 5 years to write his first record. And I think that's a great place to start the discussion, is just covering that first album, because the question that naturally follows on from that is your sophomore slump. Like, what do you have to follow up with when you've only got a fixed window of time instead of your entire lifetime to come up with that first record?
2021, Mammoth WVH. I will not stand on a hill and tell you that I know everything about Van Halen. I have surrounded myself with people that spend a lot of time listening to Van Halen and telling you that Eddie Van Halen is the greatest guitarist of all time. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to sound like Eddie. And they spend a lot of time figuring out how to play Eruption exactly the way that he played it on that live performance that one time in the 80s when I was a kid that I have a recording of because it was put out on the home movies. That's not me. I appreciate Van Halen. I know enough to be in the room and have the conversation. When I first discovered that Wolfgang Van Halen was releasing a solo album, and he was calling it Mammoth WVH, in tribute to one of the earlier names for Van Halen, I think I'm alone in I wasn't expecting him to just replicate Van Halen. I wasn't expecting Wolfgang Van Halen to go out and shred. For some reason, my brain said he knows he's not Eddie, so he's going to do as little of that as possible, if he does any at all. Then I saw the video for Don't Back Down, and there was a joke there. Wolfie's playing all the instruments, so he's playing 3 or 4 or 5 different characters in that video. Shout out to green screens. And it was great. It was rock and roll. It was the polar opposite of what I had seen him do in Van Halen, and it was the polar opposite of what anybody was expecting if you associate the name Van Halen with a musical project. He's playing a hollow body guitar. He's not gained to the end of time. So there's some area there for dynamics, and he's singing in the most beautiful, laid-back voice that he has become known for, and he was known for while he was the bass player in Van Halen. So you had to judge it on its own laurels, and now I'm gushing because 2021 sucked. We all remember what was going on in 2021, what had been going on for almost 2 years at that point, if not already 2 years. Well, in my case, 3 months before this album comes out, my dad passed away. I get to listen to the distance and I get to get the feels. And then I realize, wow, every song on this album is exactly what I wanted to hear because there were no good rock and roll records in 2021. Everything was gent or it was pop.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
It was what? Say that again?
Gent.
I'm sorry. One more time. What was that?
Gent.
I can't believe you keep falling for that. I'm in this very weird bubble. Like, this is something Joe and I were joking about off mic, before we started recording, was about the technicalities of a genre, right? Like, if you're listening to, I don't know, Slipknot. What is Slipknot? Well, is it nu metal? Is it hardcore? Is it whatever bullshit genre titles you want to put around it? Genre is a helpful guidepost, but it is not in and of itself. It is a case of the map not being the territory. I feel pretty comfortable in saying that Mammoth is rock and roll, and you could even maybe add like it's hard rock or something. But it is in that rare thing where it feels very singer-songwriter-y. It has a very, like, the lyrics are very good. He's a shockingly good lyricist. He's not a great singer in the classical sense of the word, but he has a good voice and he's in control of his voice. He's clearly a good musician in terms of instrumentation. I don't have to tell you that. And here again, if you're Eddie Van Halen's kid, it's kind of unsurprising you might be good playing guitar. So on one hand, it is really refreshing to hear just good, straightforward, solid rock and roll. It almost falls into a category like, as a guy who listened to a shitload of industrial, a shitload of punk, like very on the musical edges for a while there into weird experimental territories. The first time I heard Sunny Day Real Estate, I went, holy shit, what is this? It's such good songwriting. It's such good melody. The first time you hear a band like Hum, you go, whoa, hold on. This is recalculating what I thought you could do with rock and roll. And that leads you down like a shoegaze rabbit hole. This is cool because it's rock and roll in an older fashion that is not at all nostalgic. Like, think about bands that try to do nostalgia acts. God, where do I even start? Like a band like The Darkness. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. People have an affection for that. I don't. That yuck. Anyway, but it's trying to be a nostalgia act. It's trying to sound like a bygone era. The Mammoth WVH record is not trying to be an 80s and 90s and 2000s rock and roll. It's just its own. Well, it's just its own animal. At the risk of sounding very silly, it's its own animal, and that's really, really rare because people get very hung up on genre and don't see it as just guideposts.
Yeah, as I get older, especially, I think everybody has this problem where they kind of metastasize, and you become a little bit more inflexible with your taste in everything. And you get a couple different ways that this can go in terms of music, where you get bands like Megadeth, for example, and they kind of revert to their origins, and you just end up with a nostalgia act at that point where people just want to hear the same thing over and over and over again. And that's great if that's what you're into and you just get more of the same. But for me, I never want to be one of those people that just talks about how great things used to be. And it's easier as you get older to say, I don't identify with this. Time and tastes have moved beyond what I like. I think Wolfgang does a great job. It's funny, like Joe, you said like he came out and it was his own thing, but I think there's actually a lot of Van Halen DNA in his songwriting style and stuff, because the two things that he took away that are very Van Halen are, like you said, big hooks and also musicality. So on one hand, it's a very basic format, quote, party rock, so to speak. And, Van Halen got really heavy at times, especially, for the time. Like they tried to heavy it up sometimes, and sometimes they were just pure party. And Wolfgang does the same thing where, like, you've got songs, even on the first album, that get heavy and dark, and then you've got, like, poppy tunes as well. And what I like is that, on one hand, it's very accessible, because if you just want to hear something that's kind of familiar, you can kind of tell the structure going in, like, all right, I'm going to hear the intro, and then after 16 measures of this, we're going to get to that first verse, and then we're going to hit that chorus, and we're going to go back into the verse, and the typical radio format of the songs. And yet within that, And this is why I like bands like Seven Dust too, where they're doing something that you expect, so it's familiar and comfortable, and it's like what you like. But it's like going to a restaurant that's a fusion restaurant, and you're like, oh, well, I know I like burritos, so I'm going to go here and get this at the Mexican fusion restaurant. But then they throw in like some sort of like Vietnamese ingredient out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, that's novel. I didn't know those two things went together.
Blue cheese on your burrito.
Instances. Yeah, like there's so many instances in this first record where even the first track, I had a problem with the first track itself right off the bat. Mr. Ed, originally like the chorus hits, and it goes to this simple 4/4 with the bass drum out of nowhere when it had kind of like a more of a lighter rock groove in the verse. And at first I was like, it sounds like he bolted a different chorus onto this song. But what it was really doing was kind of mentally recalibrating you as an audience member to think, just because you think you know where the song is going next, it might not. And he's going to make some novel choices in there that aren't the common choices. So he walks that line just like Van Halen did, where he does a basic form, but he elevates it by throwing in some nuance.
I agree, but I don't know. I want to make a kind of counter argument about it, is that on one hand, he takes the real fundamental rudiments of good rock and roll and does them real well, and he throws a little bit of his own flavor on, and he throws the proverbial Vietnamese element into his burrito, we'll say, his mammoth burrito. But at the same time, it also feels very safe. Like, knowing how talented he is from his work with Van Halen, and hearing just like, oh, this guy's clearly got blues chops. This guy's clearly got a certain level of that high technicality rock and roll. I kind of want him to push a little further. And he does in the next album. But it is, on one hand, it's cool to see someone do something that is very clearly their own. But it's another thing entirely to be like, oh, but you could be so much weirder. And maybe it's just that I like it weird. Like, fans of the show who listened to the previous episode about Author and Punisher know that I like the experimental side of extremely ugly music. So maybe I'm just a little biased here, but I see how it's both a positive and a negative. And again, as his music evolves, you can hear him doing different things. And again, it's just cool to watch a musician evolve in that regard.
Yeah, you do get a little bit of that. I think he's a product of his time in some respects, because back in olden days of yore, like the 70s and the 80s and whatnot, when it was truly, you bought an album and you listened to an album, so you could go on a musical journey and have these weird experimental tracks in the middle because you're going from one emotional place to another. Nowadays, it's all singles. Albums are more collections of singles than they are true singular works that have chapters to them.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get as much experimentation, to your point, because no one listens to the 4-minute what the fuck track in the middle of all the rest of the stuff. They want to be able to like hit that spin on Spotify and get those clicks,
Sure,
Number
absolutely.
Number nine. This record is 14 tracks of good songs. They're not all singles, but they all could be.
And they're all individually listenable. Yeah. I think there is something with this first record where it doesn't have the flow of an album, where some songs come after other ones, and it's not like a natural transition. It's just like, here's another song, whether it follows that one or not.
Yeah, I have so few complaints about this as an album. The only thing I can really say is, at 14 tracks, by the end of track 13, I was just going, all right, well, here comes another rock and roll anthem. Got it. Here we go. And not because I think any of these songs are in and of themselves bad. I just think you could pull one or two songs off the album and just tighten up the editing just a little bit. And I feel like it would be a much easier experience to listen to. And again, it's not because of weakness. I think he just kind of drags it out a bit. But for a freshman release, to drag it out a bit being the only complaint, I mean, it's damn near a perfect rock album.
I mean, yeah, he does break away from the formula, so to speak, a little bit. I'm looking at the track lengths, for example, and the radio format says you want 3 minutes, 320 tops. You want to get the maximum number of spins per hour, that kind of thing. He's got, Resolve is 5 minutes. You've got Stone at 6:33.
Yeah.
4 minutes for You're to Blame. And You're to Blame is like one of the poppiest ones they got. Like, that's a great tune. But still a little bit long for the radio format. So he wasn't afraid to break out of the genre a little bit. but he still stuck true to it. Now, we talked about 14 tracks. Do we count the bonus tracks as well, like on the digital deluxe that has Talk and Walk and As Long As You're Not You?
Whatever makes you happy. Those, to me, feel like classic bonus material, right? You can buy the album.
Goodbye. I'm sorry, there's actually 3 songs on there.
Right, but you can buy the record. You know, if we go back, if we're old school, you can buy the record and you'll get the 10 tracks. But if you spend just $5 more, you can get the deluxe edition. Back when that felt like it meant something special instead of just being a marketing strategy of buy this, not this. I'll say it again, whatever makes you happy. I'm happy with the album as it is. You know, an album that starts with Mr. Ed and ends with Distance. You've got an emotional, I fell apart just saying it. You got an emotional roller coaster coming for you that you better lock in on. And this album does what a good record does for me, is it makes you want to lock in. Twist My Arm. I can skip Feel and Stone to get to Distance, but key phrase being twist my arm. I don't put this record on weekly and skip tracks. I don't want to. It holds my attention in a way that good music will keep you interested and make you want to listen to it. And I still hear things that I think I've never heard before. After the second record, we're going to talk about Mammoth II in a couple minutes, I started questioning how often Wolfie actually shreds or how often he actually plays a lead on the first record. And coming back and listening to it, they're in there, but there's nothing you could call a Van Halen solo. Wolfgang Van Halen is very aware of how to write a good song. So this record to me feels like he sat down with Michael Basquette, the producer, and said, I want to do everything right and not really push any boundaries, but I want to do everything right like it was done 20 years ago. And my friend Aaron works out in LA. He's done music production now for about 20 years, and he always talks about the loudness war and how he was getting advice from the pros when he was trying to break into the business, that dynamics were good and everything he was doing, trying to make something sound good without just blowing out everything, was the right approach. And if you stick with it, in 10 years, everybody will be over it. And this record sounds like that. This sounds like somebody who's been surrounded by music his whole life, who's been in the music industry his whole life, who has played in one of the biggest bands of all time and is surrounded by all the right people to be successful. And the advice he gets is just do what sounds good to you. And in 2021, I'll say it again, nobody was writing a good rock record and getting credit for it, at least. So maybe Mammoth WVH opened the door for, okay, we've had enough of the 2010s.
Yeah, I can see that. And, you know, we were talking kind of what are our favorite songs on this album. For me, the song Mammoth from Mammoth off the album Mammoth is maybe, I think, the best on the album other than Don't Back Down, which is, I think, one of the real standouts. The thing that I like about this album more than anything is kind of leaning on the point you were making, is that I will take an album that is imperfect. I will take an artist who is not, in a technical sense, extremely good if they're doing something that's either really, really interesting or is authentic. I don't give a shit about technicality, ultimately. I'm way more concerned with an authentic voice, with someone who clearly is dumping their soul out on stage. Like, the Stooges may not have been the most scintillating technical live act, but they fucking meant it. And if you got on stage with them to try to take the mic away from Iggy Pop, he'd fucking beat you to death, you know? Like, there was that level of pure intensity, pure authenticity in that moment. Now, Iggy Pop is old enough to be all of our grandfathers now, and I still wouldn't get on stage with them because I'd be worried about that. But that's my point, though, right? Is that there is a level of such intense authenticity. Again, this doesn't sound like anything other than what it is. Other than you could say, well, it's rock and roll, so it kind of sounds, yeah, no shit, it kind of sounds like rock and roll. But I think that it's a deeply authentic and deeply personal album, which is something that I just wasn't hearing at this point, you know? I've also been very tuned out of just straight line rock and roll, so to kind of get this as a reintroduction to the genre as a whole, it's really nice, actually.
Yeah, and there's, like you said, there's not a lot of fluff on this where straight ahead rock and roll almost seems passe, where, wait, you're just going to play some guitars and drums and sing over top and call it a day? Like, where's the loops and the samples and the auto-tune and all that stuff? I'm sure there is auto-tune, of course, but
Just imagine that smiling Wolfgang Van Halen face going, that shit is stupid, AJ. Why would I use that?
Right. But there's just enough slop in this mix where you, like you said, Lucas, there's an authenticity here. And even though the production is phenomenal.
Oh, it's great.
Love listening to this record. Sonically, it just makes my ears happy.
Mm-hmm.
I love listening to it. It's actually what I use to EQ my car. Like anytime I
good choice, by the way.
There's a few tracks that I use to EQ cars when I'm in the market, and anything off of the first record is definitely in there for it.
Man, you and I must come from very different worlds, because there's two albums that I use for testing stereos. That is Nine Inch Nails' Broken, because it will just test the limitations of what your stereo can manage, and Real Gone by Tom Waits, because if you put on Real Gone and it sounds like a shitty recording being made 3 houses down, then it's perfect. You know, you've got your EQ right. So, but no, I mean, in terms of just pure good fucking production, like good instrumentation, good songwriting, good production, this is about the gold standard as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And it's not wall of guitars where you can tell that there's 27 tracks playing over each other.
Right.
You know, there's enough separation where, it's not just one guitar, two guitar, bass, drums, vocals, let's go. There is some layering to it and nuance, but it's not. It's sonically separated. I don't have the audio engineer background to really speak smartly, but yeah, you can hear all the parts separately. So to your point, like every time you listen through the album, Joe, you can pick up on something else. Like if you're not paying attention to the bass this time, you'd be like, oh, there is a harmony on that vocal. I didn't notice that. That kind of thing. I love being able to pick out different details every time I give this a listen.
It sounds like it's composed for a band, not composed for the internet. And that means something to me. When you pick your guitar heroes or your drum heroes or your bass heroes or your singing heroes, you're picking someone that the overall product is etching in your soul something that you now want to do. I know why I play guitar, and I know what people led me to want to play guitar. I know what bands led me to want to play in a band. So the amalgam of music that is in my brain that is now being expressed through Dr. Scott and the Dammit Janet's, one of the best bands in the world, I know where that comes from. Most people who watch videos on YouTube want to grow up and make stuff on YouTube. It feels really good to me to have somebody just step through the door with all the credibility in the world, of all the expectations in the world, and say, you know what? Rock and roll is still good. And since nobody believes me, my name is Wolfgang Van Halen, and I'm going to remind you all how good rock and roll can be, not layer upon layer of electronic false crap. This sounds like a band is going to perform it when I go to see the band play live, not so many layers of things that there is either a backing track or so many people on stage I can't pick out who's doing what.
Yeah, I was really wondering how that was going to go, knowing that he played all the parts on the record. I'm like, okay, so what's the touring act going to sound like? Because obviously he's got to get other people to kind of either put the same vibe on these performances as he did on the record, or you're going to get a very different experience. And to your point, like there's a simplicity to this music where you want to hear the musicianship come through in every part of the music. So if your drummer doesn't play like Wolfie, you're getting a different experience. And then it's a question of, do you want that variety because you want the authenticity that Wolfie put into every track, or do you want like people trying to emulate the Eruption solo to, the exacting degree and rob it of all the soul that it had when it was first played?
Exactly. We got to mention Distance because that was the first thing anybody heard with the Mammoth WVH name on it. And I saw a YouTube video that was a compilation of home movies, everything from Wolfie's birth to his life. And obviously this song was something he wrote, later said it in an interview. He wrote it while his father was still alive from the position of, this is something I would write when you're not here. And apparently, Eddie loved Distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great story. I tell you what, in that voicemail at the end of the music video, I don't think anybody who's ever had a father doesn't get a little choked up at this.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason I listen to the album and not watch the video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great but hard at the same time, you know?
I think sincerity is one of the most important things that every few years gets talked about because it gets de-emphasized by the industry. Pick your art or expression of choice, whether it's movies, art, film, gaming, etc. Eventually, somebody has to stand up every 5, 10, 15 years and say, you know what? We need some integrity back. We need to be real again. And it's an interesting year for that because there's a lot of new toys that are not real that I have zero concern are going to touch anything that has been written or christened by Wolfgang Van Halen. But it is not the best single. It's the best story. So to be that important to not the band, but to the person to release Distance first. Don't Back Down would get the video. And for me, that's the single. If you're trying to sell your new band, your new album, your new career, the next stage of your career. But Distance is the first thing you're going to hear because it's the most real thing I've got. Wow, there's a lot of people that would listen to that or watch that and say, it's sweet, but I don't hear my next big rock band with it. You're not supposed to. This is supposed to be the peak of this 14-track journey of starting in the middle, going up, going down, going back up, and then a nice plummet.
You think there might have been a little marketing savvy in that, though, knowing that, you know, with Eddie's passing, that this story, like you said, had real marketability?
I wouldn't say there's marketing savvy as much as it was the time for him to release it because he kind of wrote it so he could release it when it was time. The fact that he wrote it and recorded it and played it for his dad and his dad loved it, you know, I could see there being that awareness of, I wrote it now so I don't have to put off writing it later. Because imagine if he had to write this after Eddie's passing, he might be staring at it for 5 years or longer and never get anything going. Wolfgang Van Halen strikes me as very motivated. He's had the right upbringing, training, guidance, throw all the words in, to know when it's time to buckle down and get the work done. Because these songs are not pleasant stories if you dissect them from the beginning to the end. I've heard this record described as just a whole lot of songs about breakups, and I don't hear that. I hear about loss and family and, to use the word directly, don't back down. I hear a lot of don't quit. It sucks, but it's going to get better. But right here at the very end, I got to tell you guys, you know, it sucks losing your very close parent after a long time. And this is Wolfgang Van Halen's version of that.
Well, you know, we're talking about this, you know, the loss of a family member, which I'm gonna go on the record here and say everyone who's on this call has had some, if not tragic, then just deep loss in their life or some deep pain that they're not fully processed or that you're just gonna have to kind of live with forever, and that's fine. But, you know, if it were just an album about breakups, quote unquote, or about perseverance and being positive, a sincere expression of that is a sincere expression of that. And there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. I mean, I'm sorry. Anyone who's going to be listening to this show who says they've never listened to a sappy rock and roll song at the end of a relationship, say that they've never done that, is a fucking liar. We all have. And it's, and that's the thing. There's nothing wrong with that, because I would much rather listen to an earnest song about, yeah, I went through this hard fucking situation, and so I wrote four pieces of music about it, than him trying to like puff himself up in a Motley Crue kind of way. And we're in this weird position with a guy like Wolfgang Van Halen, right? Your mom's Valerie Bertinelli, who was one of the biggest actresses on TV at one point. Your father's Eddie Van fucking Halen, which means you've been surrounded by David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar, and you've had musicians in and around you your entire life. One could perhaps excuse Wolfgang Van Halen if he were a little more, I don't know, unhinged maybe, but he's doing this very human thing, and I really like that a lot. And it is kind of there's a pretty good chance he's going to live a long time too, because he got to see rock and roll excess run through, if not his immediate family, then just the world he was from. Yeah, it's interesting the way he's chosen. He really forged his own path right from the start. Right, like to your point, it would have been very easy with those kinds of personalities in the room to just be like,
yeah, I'm just going to do more of that. Like he was apparently very, no pun intended, instrumental in different kind of truth, and especially the tour. Like he was the one picking the songs and doing all that. So he could have just come out the door and said, all right, I'm going to do what my dad did and follow in his footsteps. And instead, like this whole record, I was really interested after this first record to see like how subsequent efforts went, because who knows really behind the scenes, like how much influence did Eddie have on that first album? You never know. But then to move on to the second record and have not more of the same, but definitely the tone be consistent, to find out, no, this was Wolfgang wrote all of the first record, as far as my ears tell me, based on what he's written since then, without the possibility of having Eddie in the room.
A few things happened between the release of Mammoth WVH and 2023's Mammoth II. The one that stands out to me, specifically involving Wolfgang Van Halen, was the unexpected death of Taylor Hawkins, drummer of the Foo Fighters. And I always think of the Foo Fighters when I think about rock and roll as an example of it never really died, because bands like the Foo Fighters are still there. So despite all of the fake, artificial, one-man laptop projects that exist, there's always a band like the Foo Fighters that is reminding you you can put any combination of musicians together and create some really awesome music. What I wasn't expecting was Wolfgang Van Halen to walk out on stage and play Hot for Teacher and Panama, and it sound exactly like Eddie Van Halen. And I don't mean sonically. I mean the mistakes that you listen for when you listen to your friend play his favorite Van Halen song, or the guy at the bar who decides tonight we're going to play Panama or we're going to play Eruption. And I'm listening for those errors, and they don't happen. Makes sense, right? This isn't just some guy who sat down and said, I need to learn some Van Halen songs. No, this is a Van Halen who had an entire career with that band, who can play every instrument, and that's his family. That's his blood. It makes sense that he can pull that off. The first song I heard off of 2023's Mammoth II was Take a Bow. And I was a little worried. We always have that thought. Okay, first album was great, but can you do it again? I had complete confidence that Wolfgang Van Halen could do it again. But Take a Bow broke my brain. There is an argument amongst musicians that the sound is in the hands, or you know what you need to sound like your favorite guitarist? You need this amplifier, or you need that pedal, or you need this speaker, or this drum head. There are arguments for days about what actually matters, and spoilers, in my opinion, it comes down to the speaker and your ability to perform. But if the sound of the guitarist is in the hands, why is it Wolfgang Van Halen can plug into Eddie's guitar rig and it sounds like Eddie kinda? I was laying in bed early in the morning with my lady, and there's a new Wolfgang Van Halen song. It's called Take a Bow. I'm going to listen to it. And okay, it's kind of slow. It's kind of laid back. It's got a little diddly thing going on. Then the solo kicks in, guys. I rewound that solo 50 times to the point of annoyance because I couldn't answer the question. It's clearly Wolfie, but I think some of this is Eddie. It sounds like some of this is Eddie. And yes, I know he used the guitar. The song Take a Bow is about the guitar. We all know which guitar we're talking about, right? Take a bow. You've had your career. Now you get to go away. Yeah. But that wasn't the only thing of Eddie Van Halen's that was used on this album. He used more than one piece of Eddie's gear. But to hear somebody who not only has withheld the peak of his talent, meaning, yeah, I can do all the Eddie Van Halen stuff if I want to, but I'm holding back some of that because that's not what I want to be known for. I don't just want to show up and be an imitator. I want to be me, and that's not all I am. But he starts letting some of it out.
I think, this is going to seem like an insane comparison, but just hear me out. I think we get this idea in our head of this gold standard, right? Like this platonic idea about what a thing should be. A good example of that is when my grandmother passed away. She left a lot of her recipes for people to have to use later on. Well, she made these really incredible bread rolls, and for a about 20 years, no one could figure out why you're using the same recipe. Why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this taste the way she did it?
Because grandma was a liar and she left out the part that says just add salt to taste.
You're not far off. So for several years, me and a few people were like, okay, so was it a regional brand of flour that was only used in this one part of Texas? No. Okay. Was it a brand of a leavening that we're not aware of? How much salt was she using? Finally, I'm talking to my mom over Christmas and she says, oh yeah, no, me and a few people went through and we re-replicated it. And I said, well, what the fuck is it? What am I doing wrong? Why has no one gotten it? She goes, you have to knead it by hand a certain length of time to get it to rise the way it did. And if you don't, it just comes out flat, which is the exact problem everyone was having. There is a level of it, though, that I kind of realized, like, as much as I appreciate that, and I'm glad we've figured out the secret recipe, so to speak, I don't know that I want my food to taste that way. Not because it's bad. It's actually excellent and I adore it. But you can use Eddie Van Halen's guitar and you can use his amp and you can be in his studio and it's going to sound a little like Eddie because you're using his gear, you're in his studio, and you literally have his DNA in your body. But also your lived experience is going to dictate not only what sounds right to you, but what you're willing to create. Because, using another example, I do some photography as a hobby. My mom does some photography as a hobby. And if you give her and I the same camera, of course our pictures are going to look kind of the same because we have some of the same things going on. But she has her eye and I have my eye, and we're going to photograph things differently. That's just because that's what happens. So I anyone who says like, well, yeah, this is good, but it could be more Van Halen. Well, then go listen to Van Halen. They have 30 years of music out there. You have no excuse if you want to listen to Van Halen to not listen to Van Halen. If you want to listen to Mammoth, then listen to Mammoth because they're doing the Mammoth thing.
To be clear, I'm not saying this needs to be more Van Halen.
Sure.
What I'm saying is I think Wolfgang Van Halen is the exception to all previous arguments. The sound of X is in the hands. No, apparently with just the right amount of training and upbringing and enough attitude of I just want to do my thing, you can actually just say, this is what it sounds like when I do it. But when my dad did it, it sounds like this, and it sounds exactly the same. I'm saying he is the exception to all previous expectations.
Yes, but can Wolfgang Van Halen, can he make bread rolls?
I don't know. But I'm going to ask him when I meet him in November at the factory in St. Louis.
I assume that your refusal to answer that means no.
I've never seen him make bread rolls, but I imagine if he could, it's something he's holding on to until the right time.
I believe that there's not anything quite so different between a guitar and a rolling pin. So I think he can bake.
I think that's fair. I'm sorry, what were we talking about again?
We're talking about Mammoth II from 2023 and how great it is because it didn't hit me the first time as a whole the same way the first one did. It took me a few weeks and more than a few listens to hear the formula. And I don't mean the formula like this is how the first song goes and then it builds to the... No, I mean the first record is such a cohesively well-executed story that the second record, it's the same musician, it's the same producer, it's the same brains behind it, but it didn't hit me the same way. The songs are still there. He's letting more leads out. It didn't have the same rhythm the first time I listened to it. Since then, I have come to appreciate it as nearly perfect. We've only got 10 songs this time, so I know you're happier.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joe, you're saying it's a grower, not a shower.
For me, it was. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, now, Lucas, I'm going to guess that this one hits a lot better for you. Like you said, shorter tracks, or shorter track count, rather. So 10 tracks instead of the 14, like you said. And you were saying that, the guardrails were kind of on, like it's a bit safe, I guess, would be the way to say the first record. And this one just branches out.
The word safe is exactly what I had in my notes, that the first album it's a little too safe. This album...
Really?
Yeah. The second album is an immediate hit for me. I was instantly like, oh, fuck, this is the album I wanted to hear when I was listening to the first album. It is tighter. It is a little... I don't want to say experimental, because, again, it's just straight the fuck up rock and roll. but it's branching out. It's playing with different ideas. It's screwing around with some production stuff. I really appreciate what this was. This album hits really, really hard. And I am not a person to say like, oh, you need to go listen to whatever, because everyone's got their own taste. But I would tell anyone who's interested in this sort of thing that Mammoth II is just an ass-kickingly good album. And there's not a weak spot on it anywhere. And at no point by the end of it was I going, fuck, will this album just end? No, I was so happy with the length of it. It was virtually perfect.
See, I will challenge that. I will say that I put the first and second records on equal footing because I think the overall, for my enjoyment, the overall quality of each song on the first record is very consistent.
Right.
On the second album, I feel like the highs are higher and the lows are lower. So you get like the first single that dropped, Another Celebration at the End of the World. Ripper of a tune.
Oh, yeah.
Love that song.
Yeah.
Love it. But then you close out with Better Than You. And that one is just, I want to take an ice pick to my ear. It just goes on. It just goes on. And it's just.
It could have been.
I hate to use the word sonically again, but something about like the chords that he chose and the way they just keep hammering at your eardrum. I'm like, it's physically painful at times.
He makes a couple weird choices on this album, specifically two songs. I'm All Right, to me, sounds like a Bruce Springsteen song. And I don't know if I mean that positively or negatively. It's a weird.
How do you feel about Bruce Springsteen?
I don't know if I. Okay, so here's the thing. You want to talk about a great songwriter? Man, Bruce Springsteen. He as far as American rock and roll goes, he's one of the best. But if I ever hear him do that fucking Christmas song ever again, if I ever hear him sing Santa Claus, listen. I believe Bruce Springsteen is a great artist, and I'm glad he's still around. But I want to beat him to death every time I hear that fucking song. Good God. So. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, what side of Bruce Springsteen are you talking about, right? And then the song Erase Me reminds me a lot of the Gaslight Anthem. And I like the Gaslight Anthem in kind of short bursts. Like the length of an album with them is great, but more than that, I'm done with them singing about New York, and I'm tired of the guitar leads. Holy shit.
Yeah, you raised some really good points. I will say I appreciate this album for the experimentation, like you were talking about, Lucas. Mm-hmm. My favorite track by far, the one that my ears instantly perked up at, was Optimist. Mm-hmm. That one is. Have you seen the behind-the-scenes videos of him trying to teach that drum beat? Like it's in, I think it's 7/8 time signature. It's bizarre,
right? Because I'm Wolfgang Van Halen.
It's like Pink Floyd's Money, where it's this wonky time signature where he's just like, yeah, I can play it. And he even says, like, yeah, I wrote it, and then I realized I had to teach someone else how to play it so I could put it on the set list. Like, yeah, congratulations, you can play it, but no one can follow it. So,
I mean, you want to talk about the recipe that you don't know. Is it the ingredients or is it what I'm doing with the ingredients? This is a classic example. And wonky is a good word to talk about this album. There's a lot of places that he goes where he kind of branches out musically where you're going, what the fuck are you doing? Again, nothing I find objectionable necessarily, but very much out of what you might expect. He's going in some weird places, experimenting, if not experimental.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes sense because you think about like when this album was written. The first one, everyone thinks because Eddie had passed by the time it came out, they thought that was his way of processing that loss. But as we covered, it was already written. Yeah. It was in the can in 2018, and it was just waiting for the right time to come out.
I imagine most of the discography at this point is either done or partially written before the first one even came out. I think there's that much foresight for Wolfgang Van Halen. He knows where he wants to go, so he's executing a 5-year plan rather than making it as he goes along.
Yeah, but this is that important sophomore effort where you're like, all right, you don't have a lifetime of experience to write this record. You have since you stopped writing the last record. And so you get 2019 and forward from Wolfgang here, and it's the passing of his father, it's the pandemic, it's the passing of the Foo Fighters drummer. There's so much stuff in here that he's processing in real time almost. I feel like that's what this album reflects, is like the highs and the lows of someone who's really navigating in real time, where some days you're good, some days you're awful. And just ride the ride with them. You're on board the whole journey.
It's the thing no one tells you about grief, right? Like, grief alters your life in an utterly unpredictable way. And it's not in 6 months' time or a year or in 2 years, I'm going to feel better and it's going to be normal again. It's never normal again after that. Everything with grief is +1. Is, okay, well, this person has passed away. Today is day 0. Now, tomorrow will be the day they died +1. Until one day it's +365 or +10 years or whatever. Those are your pivotal points in life. Those are where things change and you have to say that things are different now for whatever reason. And, you know, the funny thing about grief is that it operates completely on its own timeline. So that it took him a whole album of kind of getting his head around it. Of course, the album's a little darker. The album relies more on atmosphere and tone, less than the first album, I think. And I would be very surprised if that weren't the case, you know?
The other ingredient in that recipe, though, is also the success of the first record.
Yeah.
So it's not all about grief and loss. It's also, how do you deal with success? Like, it's so easy to chase something and be optimistic for the future. It's a different thing to say, now I have it, and maybe it's not everything I expected it to be. You've got, you know, your doubters, your deniers, your trolls, all that kind of stuff. So on one hand, you achieved your highest dream, but also you have to deal with everyone who says you didn't deserve it, or it wasn't as good as everyone else said it was, and everything else that people can do to try to tear you down because you are on top, and some people just like everyone else to feel as miserable as they do. That's where I'm All Right was that song. It was all about trolls.
It's never okay to just show up and be good, but it's something that I think every artist, especially musicians, they figure out. Sometimes you just got to put in a little bit of work, and when you show up and play and it sounds good, people will continue listening to it rather than, you know, being teenagers and just getting a gig and playing when you've actually only played together 2 or 3 times. Not saying that's not fun, not saying I won't stand there and watch you do it, but there's a difference when you hear it and you see it and you just want to see it done the right way. It does feel like he knows that he's Wolfgang Van Halen now. He's not Eddie Van Halen's son who's playing bass in Van Halen. I don't think he ever really looked at himself that way, but the entire world is expecting him to do something, and for the most part, he's not doing it. But this record, you've had a couple years with the first one, which means you had a tour, which means you had a recording cycle. Again, my opinion, all of this is kind of being worked on at the same time, just based on the songs that I'm hearing, but you're stretching expectations a little bit. It's like he walked out day 1 and said, the only thing I'm going to do today is play rhythm guitar and sing and have a really good, solid band behind me. I'm not gonna ruffle any feathers. I don't want to yet. And I think from listening to some of his interviews, there's some grief in that. There's some, I can, but I'm not going to, because I'm not ready to do everything that I can do. But he did let himself out a little bit on this record, and he did it for a good reason. And in 2025, the end showed up. We're on a 2-year cycle with Wolfgang Van Halen, gentlemen, so I'm excited for next year already because these are the expectations he has put out there for me. The end, I really wasn't expecting, because after listening to the second record for the first time and not enjoying it as much as I do, I had to check myself a little bit. Do I have expectations for Wolfgang Van Halen? And he just starts off with a fucking downbeat massacre and a little bit of melody, and you know what? The band's here to fucking destroy you now. I hope that the title of the album, The End, is not meant to be taken literally, like this is the end of that phase of Mammoth. Now Mammoth is something different, but whatever Wolfgang Van Halen decides to do with it, I'm there for you. He comes out with One of a Kind. The second track is The End, where he just opens it with, y'all wanted tapping, now you're going to get it. We're in trilogy territory, I think, where we've built to the point where you're going to start getting more of what you thought you wanted 3 years ago, because not only has he had time to grow into it, but maybe he's earned it. I hate expecting people to earn things when it comes to artistry and songwriting, but this is not a unique situation. This is someone that could have just gotten the nepotism rub and didn't. He went out and wanted to do it himself, and so far, he's doing a great fucking job.
I'm going to be the villain in the room and say that if we're talking about trilogies, this is The Godfather 3. Make of that what you will.
Get out of my house.
there are things on this album.
Way to make it a two-man show.
There are things about this album that I really do like. I think the song The Spell fucking kills. It is a great song. And I feel like his lyrics have gotten a lot better. I don't think the problem for me with this album lies in Wolfgang Van Halen. For me, the problem with this album is production. I never appreciated the word overproduced until I heard this album. I've always thought when people make the comment that a thing is overproduced, like, okay, if you're talking about the most predictable pop or whatever, yeah, sure, I get that. But in rock and roll, I always thought that was kind of a strange, kind of nebulous term. But in hearing this, the sound is a lot more homogeneous. There's not that crispness, that clear separation of instruments. It feels simultaneously really overpolished, but really smudgy. Like it lacks this. This is going to sound like an insult, and I don't mean it to be. This lacks the soul of the first two albums. This one is a lot more professional and pristine, and I don't think I like professional and pristine out of a guy this talented. Those little flaws, those little quirks, those production decisions you make where the bass is just a hair higher than it would normally be. I love that stuff. And this album feels very generic is the wrong word. It just feels like a missed opportunity. I feel like if he could go through and take all of these songs and just produce them slightly differently, I think I'd like this album a lot more.
So is it the songs themselves or just the quality of the recording?
It's kind of a combination of both things, because I've heard plenty of rock and roll songs that have the same level of production that I think are just fine. I've heard plenty of albums that I would describe as deeply sonically homogenous that I really enjoy. But there's something else happening within the songwriting or the instrumentation or whatever that I really like. And for as much as I like this album and like the songs on it, because again, I feel like he's a better lyricist every time. He clearly is playing in the sense of play, in the sense of he's having fun and doing something different and experimenting. All good. But this album just rubs me the wrong way, and I think it's the production more than any one issue. Again, it's almost a little predictable.
AJ, I'm going to move out of the way and let you channel the other Drake for just a moment. And
I fear
go for
no
it, buddy.
slings and arrows.
Well, Joe, I hate to let you down, but if we're just talking about the production value itself and the sound profile overall, yeah, I did back to back and shuffle around the songs just prior to this recording of this show. And yeah, this, to his point, to Lucas's point, it is very much, unfortunately, it's a lot like recent Seven Dust albums where it is muddy. Like there's so much production on there, it lacks sharpness. The crispness of the sounds and the separation of the instruments isn't there like it was in the previous albums. Now, as far as the songwriting goes, I think I would put this as like the third bowl of porridge in, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Like you've got super safe with the first record, you've got broad and experimental, you've got heavier and lighter songs on the second record, and this one is more right in the middle. I would call this, of course I have a Star Wars podcast, I would call this like the Return of the Jedi of the original trilogy, where, Return of the Jedi wasn't nearly as a departure from the formula as Empire Strikes Back was. It was somewhere more than Star Wars and less than Empire in terms of its safety formula.
So you're saying the end by Mammoth has more Muppets?
Yes, exactly. I think that you basically saw a Wookiee in half, and you end up with the end. But you get
I don't
weird,
know what that means, but I know
like,
what you mean.
No, that's exactly how the Ewoks came to be. Is they're like, well, we were gonna put this movie on Chewbacca's home planet, but we just couldn't get that many Wookiees, so we just cut them in half instead and made them teddy bears, basically.
Remember the dead eyes, AJ. They never blinked before.
Wolfgang Van Halen says,
exactly.
This is what happens when I saw Chewbacca in half. What?
Let's talk about the singles on this record, though.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a very reductive formula for albums, but in terms of singles, I think this might have been the strongest and most diverse set of singles from all three records. Like, obviously you're going to start with The End. Great track.
Title track.
I've had 4 years of destroying you live. Now I'm just going to walk out and destroy tapping. Y'all wanted this.
Exactly.
You're going to get it. I even opened the song with it. All right, you over it yet? No. Okay, I'm still going. It's fucking awesome.
And then the third single comes out. I Really Wanna. Great, stupid party rock song, but there's an F-bomb right there in the chorus, and they made it a single. I love that. It's like I said, it's both radio friendly in its formula and the subject matter, but he's going to drop an F-bomb in there and be like, yeah, it would have been a perfect radio track, but you have to edit it. I love that. And it was stylistically so different from the other two singles.
I have to imagine it's a lot like it's 1995 and you're the audio guy at your local radio station going, oh, cool, new Nine Inch Nails song. Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me. How many times am I gonna have to bleep this?
Yes.
We're putting the censor to work today, boys.
This is the lead single? Have you lost your mind?
Right.
Hey, if Trent Reznor said this is the lead single, it's the lead single.
Well, I mean, I suppose you can't have too many pop songs with the choruses, your God is dead and no one cares. So I guess Closer is as good as we're getting here.
We made it for you, Lucas.
So, I mean, I feel bad for the guy at the radio station who's like, son of a bitch, I gotta edit this one a bunch. But as far as lead singles goes, The End and I Really Wanna, man, you can't go wrong. They're good songs in and of themselves.
I Really Wanna is enjoyable because it's a song that Wolfgang Van Halen put time and effort into. But it made me laugh the first time I heard it because it took 2.5 records for that detuned guitar song to show up. And what I mean by that is if you go back and you listen to a band that's put out 1, 2, 3, 4 albums, they get to that weird moment where somebody in the studio is just trying to come up with something and they tune the guitar down to an absurdly low note. They don't change the strings or anything and they just start riffing with it. And every guitarist that has ever done that has written a song that sounds like the opening of I Really Wanna. Just, hey, this is something different because it's low. But then he starts singing and he starts ripping a fucking solo. And you know what? I don't care. But I was waiting for that joke. I wasn't expecting that joke from Wolfgang Van Halen, but I was waiting for it on album 3 and I got it. I still like the song. It made me laugh for that.
I mean, it's better that he decided to detune the guitar and fuck around with that than Lars Ulrich just flipping the switch off of his snare and bonking his way through an entire goddamn album.
Depending on what year it is, that was Bob Rock's fault.
I don't care whose fault it was. It's still a problem. Whereas on this album, it's a nice little sonic textural change on an album that I think could have been really, again, very homogenized almost by accident by taking that option midway through the album, almost dead center, and popping off the tuning. Yeah, it's a nice change. And when it leads into the next track, Happy, it ends up being a nice contrast because this one has such a nice little acoustic bit to it, is much more clean, it's more glossy. It's smartly done. It's just it happens to be on the one album that I'm kind of like, all right, I guess. But hey, if you're going to avoid the sophomore slump, I suppose the junior slump, if we're using the high school metaphor, I'd rather have that than the sophomore slump.
Do you think there's a bit of recency anti-bias going on here too, though? The album just came out in October, so we've only had 3 months to really, get it.
Almost certainly. Like I said, for album number 2, it took me a few weeks to get it. I'm expecting this one's going to take 3 to 6 months. I do enjoy the album, but that recency bias of you're comparing it to the thing that you've had for the past few years, you're expecting something that's not there initially, and you look for whatever that is. Because what you don't want is to have to find the Black Album, Insane Anger. But you try, and you fail. And as a fan, you don't want to admit that it's not there. And I don't think The End is such a far-off journey away from the first 2 albums. It's still Wolfgang Van Halen. He's still playing every instrument. It's still the music coming out of his brain. I hope that the title, The End, is not meant to be taken literally, but there is a part of me that's worried that it is, that maybe the next Mammoth record is going to not just be what comes out of Wolfie's brain.
Well, I always like to put albums and the writing in context. So, like I said, the first album, you got your whole lifetime to come up with those ideas. And then the second one, especially in his case, you have this monumental life event of having put out the first record and everything that's happened to you since then. In his case, a lot of personal loss and grief and whatnot. And then when you get onto your third record, now you're a professional musician. Like, that is your life. Your life experiences are now day to day being famous, being successful. All the challenges and struggles that you had that fueled those first songs that you wrote when you were poor and a nobody. I don't know, Wolfgang was never those things, but at least he wasn't a professional musician. He was writing about his life prior to being himself out of his father's shadow. It's always a little hard to, maintain that same fire when life gets easier for you. There are different challenges, of course, as life moves on, but yeah, you get the sense on this one that there's not as much struggle behind the writing. So he's kind of either reflecting back on things that happened to him prior to this phase of his life, or they're not hitting him as hard because life in general has gotten easier with success and fame.
Maybe that's what the end is. It's the end of all that bullshit.
I mean, every cycle of your life has starts and ends, right? And I think we're making a mistake if we want to view a person's career on a straight timeline, right? I tend to think of things more in circles and cycles. I tend to think of things more in where are you now versus where you were, and the way things come back and leave, etc. Me taking an interest in Mammoth, and just, I had never listened to Mammoth intentionally before 2 weeks ago. It was one of those Joe said, "Oh yeah, this is the next thing. Start listening." And thank God it was only 3.
You're welcome.
Thank God it was only 3 albums, because good God, it could have gone a lot worse. But, being able to have those 3 albums and say, okay, cool, he's now ending a 3-part cycle and moving on to some new thing. Maybe the next album, and I'm just making shit up, I don't think this is what he's going to do, is going to be more, well, I've been listening to a lot of Balkan world music, so I'm going to, so there's going to be more accordions and oud being played.
Are you suggesting that Wolfgang Van Halen is going to have a Spinal Tap moment where he comes out on stage and he's got nothing but world instruments and taiko drums, and I've really been working on this loop machine? Like, is this the beginning of Bill and Ted 3?
Listen, if Wolfgang Van
18
Halen...
minutes of didgeridoo.
Listen, if Wolfgang Van Halen wants to play the hurdy-gurdy, do you think I'm going to be the guy who stops him?
If he does, it's going to be the greatest, most metal hurdy-gurdy playing of all time. And I've seen videos on YouTube.
I was going to say, I did see a video of a guy on YouTube playing Clint Mansell's Lux Eterna, the theme to Requiem for a Dream, on the hurdy-gurdy, and it's fucking terrifying. But no, I am not a person who spends a lot of time thinking about what this artist is going to do next. I'm way more interested in what the artist is doing currently, I guess. And, if his next album is going to be another 12-track banger of rock and roll anthems, fucking great, because that's what I've come to enjoy when I listen to Mammoth. But if it is going to be, I'm doing more of a folk thing. I'm playing a lot more acoustic. I'm thinking a lot about, blues and bluegrass. I trust that this guy's competent enough that he could say, I'm going to add a piano piece in here, or I have someone in here playing banjo because my song calls for a banjo section. As silly as that might seem on its face, especially in a post-Mumford & Sons world, I think there is a level where a person can say, I'm going to do something a little different on this next one. It's going to be more jazz influenced. It's going to have a slight electronicness to it. Fuck it, man. Why not? And the worst case scenario is you do that album and you go, well, I guess we're not going to do that one ever again. I wouldn't expect Neil Young to go back to doing electronic music because he tried it one time and good fucking God.
Wasn't that a middle finger to the studio, though?
I mean, to be fair, most of the time someone starts throwing synthesizers around, it typically is a middle finger to someone, if not the fans, I mean, just remember, Lou Reed wrote, in air quotes, Metal Machine music because he was angry at his label and they demanded one last album out of him. So he created the worst, most abrasive, and yet, as an industrial music fan, I kind of appreciate an album that had to have a sticker, this album contains no music. Look it up someday. It is
Yeah.
fucking wild. But my point being is that if at some point he says like, yeah, I did this, I'm going to take a year off, I'm going to really write and come up, and the next thing is going to be different. You like it or you don't. You're a fan or you're not. But here again, if it's sincere, if it is clearly, no, this really is where Wolfgang Van Halen's next creative impetus takes him, fuck it. It'll probably, if it's not good, it'll at least be interesting. Like, and I feel, if I had to put a subtitle on the end is where it's not good, at least it's interesting.
True. To your point, like you were talking about the blues and bluegrass, and maybe there's a banjo on the next record. That is one thing that I think should not be overlooked about the end is there is a little bit more experimentation and definitely leaning more into the blues direction, I think.
Yeah.
He's got piano over a couple of choruses, for example. And just, we already talked about, the single I Really Wanna, like that's just, there's such a groove to that. He's getting more into the swing and like the origins of rock and roll instead of what rock and roll became. So while it is very middle of the road, I feel like there's a bit of looking even further back than the origins of Mammoth WVH on the first record.
Well, think about Van Halen for just a second. Like, let's kind of pull it back and let's use these two to compare. Because what are maybe two of the best known, in a popular sense, Van Halen songs? Running with the Devil, which is fucking straight ahead, balls out rock and roll, and Jump, which is primarily a song played on a synthesizer. Both are decidedly Van Halen. Both are extremely technically talented songs, but one of these things is not like the other. And so, I think that you can hear it and go, but it's still definitely a fucking Van Halen song from the era.
I think it'll be interesting to see how he goes because, like you said, those are two very iconic songs from his father's band, and yet musically they have so little in common.
Exactly.
Stylistically.
Yeah.
And I feel like, Joe, to your point about the end, and is this the end of something for the band? Maybe it is, because it does feel like this sort of, quote, standard rock format that he's been doing, you can only crank that out so many times before it's just more of the same. I feel like maybe what I'm hearing from you guys is you're ready to hear something different from him. I wonder if he's ready to write something different.
Almost certainly, and this is kind of tiptoeing around my final thoughts, so here I go. Final thoughts on Mammoth. Someone whispered in Wolfgang Van Halen's ear once and said, just write good music. And that is what he has been doing, unapologetically. The formula in his brain seems to be write good music, but push it just a little bit. Tease a little bit of something that they're expecting, but not necessarily going to get. Is he going to write a piano ballad? He certainly could, but there's a couple songs that, there's an electric piano going on. You might not have consciously noted it, but that detail matters. If it wasn't there, if that layer was not there, you wouldn't hear it. I am personally thankful and glad that music started to feel and sound boring as a whole. And when there's nothing new in music that you like, you run out of options. You start to listen to just the records that you bought 20 years ago, or the latest record from that band that put out an awesome record 20, 30, and 40 years ago, like Judas Priest with Firepower or The Invisible Shield. When something new happens that is completely the opposite of what is normal, but it's not trying to be controversial or trying to be the most aggressive thing. Nope, just good fucking music. That's important and that matters to me. And I'm glad whatever Wolfgang Van Halen has in his brain is starting to come out more and more. I'm looking forward to the next record, just like I looked forward to the last record. And for me, there'll always be a place in the heart for the first record, because sometimes music shows up at the right time. Shout out to Norma Jean and Polar Similar. Lucas, final thoughts on Wolfgang Van Halen and Mammoth.
as someone who's kind of always looking for either something new or something different, not because I want novelty, but just because I don't ever want to just get stuck in that rut of, I'm going to go back and listen to the Downward Spiral 50 times, because I've already done that. I want to hear something new and interesting, or just something well done. I mean, do you always want to go to the fusion restaurant? No, of course not. Sometimes you just want a good burger or a good plate of Chinese or whatever. The thing that I'll say about Mammoth that is, to me, is just so heartening is that here is someone who is just, I mean, again, his music is just incredibly sincere and straightforward, and it's hard hitting without ever being overly dramatic or being unnecessarily drug out. And if we're going to live in a world where there's going to be rock and roll, and I think we're all better off for that, call me crazy, I think that you have guys like him coming into his own and not trying desperately to live in his father's shadow. You know, the rock and roll world is a lot better off and a lot safer with Wolfgang Van Halen involved.
AJ, what about you?
Well said, Lucas. I really agree with all your points
Thanks.
there. I think that what's really novel about Mammoth WVH, whatever you call it, is that he's had a clear musical identity of his own from the outset. And as we talked about, like, it would have been very easy to come out the door and just lean on his legacy because of the name, rather than write his own music, have his own musical voice, and just be like, yeah, I've got Eddie's stuff. I'll write Eddie's things. I'll play Eddie's chords. You know, just all you Van Halen fans, don't worry. I'm here to save you. And instead, all three records have a very consistent tone throughout, where I sense a lot of confidence and self-assuredness in Wolfgang's writing style, where he, as much as we kind of bagged on the end a little bit for being a little safe and more the same and formulaic, it also speaks to the fact that he's written 3 albums now and he knows exactly what kind of music he likes to write. And that is so hard for a, quote, new musician. And that's the other thing that's hard to realize, is that from A Different Kind of Truth on forward, we're talking 2013, even though his first record was published in 2021. So technically we're only 4 or 5 years into his musical career officially by release date, but we're actually 13 years into his musical career based on when he began writing.
And longer if you count when he was performing in one of the biggest bands of all time.
Exactly. So to be so young starting out and still not have, he's kind of skipped right past the finding himself phase and gone right to, this is what I sound like and this is how I express myself. I have absolute faith that whatever comes out next isn't going to be some wild departure. It's not going to be like the disco album from Kiss, for example.
Rough.
Like, he staked his claim. Like, he has a sound. He knows who he is. And I think that one of the reasons we're so hyped for whatever comes next is because we know that it's going to be novel in its own way, but also familiar enough to scratch that itch that these first 3 records already have.
Wow, AJ, you may have just filled in a pretty decent-sized blank for me. This is more like the grieving process if you take it from the perspective of, this is Wolfgang Van Halen skipping forward to the part where now you got to do it yourself. Because he doesn't have the same family push, as it were. That's not nepotism. That's just good on him.
I mean, it's the hero's journey, right? You've got to answer the call, and you've got to go out into the world, is to descend into the dark forest. My man, when it comes to professional industries, music is about as dark of a forest as it gets. So for him to be quite literally on his own, like surviving now on his own reputation, you know, there's a parallel universe where Wolfgang Van Halen is an incredibly successful corporate attorney or incredibly successful accountant, or when people go like, are you related to, yeah, that's my dad. Well, then why are you a plumber? I don't fucking know, man. I just like being a plumber. There's a parallel universe where he never had to deal with living in his father's shadow. But now we can point to, yes, he played in X band, but he also has his own project that is primarily what he's doing now. I mean, fuck, man. He could have decided to have become a studio musician and just been a guy. You know, he could have been a Billy Howard-L and been like, yeah, I mostly just play for other people. Well, here you go. right? Like, clearly, I think this is the start of a good career. And frankly, if he pulled the plug now and said, fuck it, man, I just want to be a studio musician, these 3 albums stand on their own. And they really are. I mean, the third album being my least favorite of the 3, still, it's a rock solid album. So, yeah, I think the points we're on here are fundamentally correct, especially not having to live in his father's shadow anymore. I think that's a very freeing thing because he's off of one leash and now onto his own. And we're in a very weird world where we try to tell people, like, you want to have as few cages around you as possible. True, but having rule sets can actually be quite liberating because it tells you what you can do. Now it's up to him to write his own rule set.
Yeah.
Well said, sir. What's your album of the week?
My album of the week is 2025's Amen by the French tech death noise core absurdist nightmare that is Igor. And I say Igor because there's 3 R's at the end of that name. If you are wondering what it would sound like to end a technical death metal song with a piano being smashed by a backhoe, my friend, go look up the song Headbutt by Igor because it is just the wildest batch of beautiful nonsense you've ever heard.
AJ, what about you?
I've been in a bit of a throwback mood, and I like my music heavy. So the one that I decided to go back and listen to that has just been on repeat in my car especially is The Poison by Bullet for My Valentine. 2005, great
Very nice.
debut record. Love it. Ripper from start to finish.
Well, we are talking about Mammoth, so obviously my album of the week is pick one because all 3 of them are great. Lucas actually turned me on to Igor Amen earlier today, and I'm looking forward to that one. So pick your poison, ladies and gentlemen. AJ, thanks for hanging out with us.
Oh, hell yeah.
One more time, in case anybody wasn't listening at the start of the show, anything awesome coming up on the Nerfherder Council that we can mention? Spoilers.
Well, we are contractually obligated of the bi-weekly shows that we put out that at least every other one is going to be Star Wars related. So that's low-hanging fruit right there to say, yeah, I'm on a Star Wars podcast. We're going to talk about some Star Wars. But you know what I've got the itch for? I think it's in advance of Maul Shadowlord coming out in April. I think it's time to start looking back at the animation legacy that led us to the Maul series, starting with Clone Wars and running through Bad Batch and Tales of the whatever that comes out every May 4th. Like, the evolving art style is a great through line to show where it started and where it is now. So I would say, and this is actually hot goss because I haven't even talked to JT about this, there's going to be something Clone Wars discussed in the next month or so, for sure.
Thanks for hanging out with us, dude.
Dude, thank you so much for having me on. I will say that this was we could have gone another 90 minutes on this, I think. We didn't even get into the weeds of things.
We can do that if you want.
Yeah, fantastic time. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, let's do this again sometime.
And on that note, this has been episode 287 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to questions@discussmetal.com. If you want to keep this conversation going, join us on Discord at discord.discussmetal.com.
I really think whoever looked at a crab, on the seashore and said, well, we're starving. We've got to do something, I guess. And that appears edible. And then his caveman buddy went, but what about garlic butter? Yes, because cavemen have garlic butter. They were like, what if we boil this and we put the meat in garlic butter? And someone said, well, fuck it. We're going to starve if we don't. And here we are. Your brother's now shortening his life. I've got to be on warfarins because of it. What I'm saying.
Oh, wait, you have to take the weird allergy medication?
No.
Okay, just check.
No. All I'm saying is
I have to explain this coffee if you were.
If you put enough garlic butter on my boots that I'm wearing right now, I'd try. Like, I'd see how it is.
It's worth the effort, yeah.
I don't know if anyone remembers these short-lived. I don't know where they short-lived. I feel like I lost track of them. But there was a band in the.
Very sorry about that.
What the fuck was that?
Very sorry about that, sir. Continue your thought.
Ow! Okay, let's try that again.
Don't click that button, Joe.
I heard that through the mic. That's how loud that was.
David Lee Roth and the second vocalist for Van Halen. Come on, Lucas.
Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, thank you.
Sammy Hagar.
Sammy
Yeah.
Hagar.
How did we not get onto the fact that he writes and records everything himself instead of having a band with him the whole time?
I said that so many times that you weren't paying attention.
I did refer
We
to
said it, but we didn't discuss it. We just reported it as a fact.